we're going to begin our Region 9 virtual town hall. This is our last virtual town hall. Region 9, number 9 in the region, number 1 in your heart, Long Island. So our focus was to, and our plan was to have the traditional regional meetings, and the executive board and the staff from the association would have been traveling from far west all the way out to the tip of Long Island to spend time with you and have these important discussions. But ultimately, the pandemic, like most of us, has derailed a lot of our plans. But what we did identify is that, you know, Mike and the executive board thought that having these discussions were far too important for us to let it go an entire year without revisiting this. You're going to see that Mike is going to share historic information with you dating back all the way to 2015. So you can see there's a lot of information that these conversations are built on. And we're going to ask that everybody please keep your microphones on mute until we get to the portion of the meeting where we're going to have a open and honest dialogue. And during the pandemic, and I think it's important that we acknowledge Mike Linotti and our professional staff at the association for their hard work. Mike did a spectacular job keeping lines of communication open for us with the governor's office, making sure that our needs were met, that all of our concerns were heard in Albany, and that our needs were first and foremost. So on behalf of everybody that's here, Mike, once again, I want to thank you and the professional staff for helping us and being there for us. And I'll turn the microphone over to you, Mike Linotti.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. Bill, thank you very much for those kind words. I know I can just tell all of you that on behalf of the entire staff here, we were just happy to do anything we could to help you guys continue to serve your families through the pandemic. So please know that we're still monitoring everything on a daily basis. And while I have you all, before we get into the topic for today, just if you want to mark it on your calendars, we are planning to have a COVID update webinar similar to the ones we were doing during the surge on November 5th. So more details will be coming out on that. But as we head into the fall and winter months, and some things are changing, we want to make sure that we are making sure everybody has all the details of what is in place and what potentially might be coming down the pike at their disposal. So again, we'll have more information coming, but since I have many of you on the line today, I figured it'd be a good place to remind you or let you know. So as Bill mentioned, I'm going to go through an overview for you, and then the majority of our time will be on discussion. Just a couple of other housekeeping notes. This, like all of our town halls the last couple of weeks, is being recorded. So if you have colleagues who are not able to join us due to any conflicts, they will have an opportunity to hear the comments and see the overview at their convenience. If anybody on this call also would like to see what was discussed in any of the other town halls, all of them will be posted probably early next week so that you can take a look and see what discussions were going on in other parts of the state. Last little bit of information. We are scheduled for an hour, but we really don't have any time constraints, so we can go for as short or as long as the conversation leads us. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So just before I go into the overview, I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsors who, thanks to their support, helped us underwrite these town halls. So we want to just thank them. We appreciate their support of us. So as I mentioned, I want to go through a short overview for you on the two topics we want to discuss with you today. And those are dubbed paraprofessionals, and the other is the alcohol and funeral homes. After this overview, we will then open up the floor for your comments, feedback, and question. The goal of this, like all the town halls, has been to obtain member feedback. That is the primary goal of these sessions. As I already mentioned, each region is having its own town hall. They're being recorded. What the process is going to be after this town hall is staff here will consolidate all the feedback we received and present that to the board at their December board meeting. It's also very important for everyone to know there is no desired outcome as a result of these town halls, and there have been no defined next steps or plans set. We at the association have taken no official position on any of the issues to be discussed at this point, and neither has there been any research or drafting of legislation. I bring that up simply because these two issues, if we were to move forward, would require legislative changes. So I just wanted everyone to know exactly where we are in the process. So as Bill mentioned, I want to just kind of give you the full picture as it relates to this larger issue of the funeral service workforce. That dates all the way back to 2015 with our first task force that looked at this issue, which is the Funeral Service Education Task Force. And so I'm just going to walk you through everything right up until today's town halls. So the Funeral Service Education Task Force worked from 2015 to 17. And as you can see there, their goal was to strengthen and elevate funeral service now and for the future. They had several focus areas, which were residency, education and curriculum in the mortuary science colleges, continuing education, and master certification. When they were done, they had several recommendations that they presented to the board. With regard to residency, they had recommended to add a discernment period and increased accountability and structure around the residency programs. Just as a side note, that process is in its final stages now. We have actually just this past year finalized legislation that we are poised to introduce into the state legislature when we're ready to do so now. We've completed all the conversations with all the stakeholders, including the mortuary science programs and the Bureau on those issues. With regard to education and curriculum, they propose a new curriculum for the mortuary science programs and recommended for continuing education and master certification, a new mandatory credentialing program and higher quality continuing education program review and approval. So when their work was done, a year later, the president at the time formed the Funeral Service 2020 Task Force, which worked from 2018 to 19. As you can see, their goal was somewhat related to the first task force goal. Theirs was to explore and implement new programs to ensure a bright future for funeral service. In some ways, what their work did was continue and extend the work of the task force. And in other ways, it expanded the scope. So you can see that through the areas of focus that are listed there. The residency and professional development were areas originally addressed by the education task force, but recruitment, mentorship, and paraprofessionals were additional or expanded items to look at. What I like to say is that this task force really took a holistic approach to the funeral service workforce issues that were being discussed. And that circle graph is there to try and help depict that. So they were looking at the quality and quantity of the workforce, going all the way to what we called pre-students, which were really the high school students, and looking for ways to try to make sure that they were aware of funeral service as a career and give them some tools to help them understand what would be involved in becoming a funeral director if they had an interest. And then kind of walking through if you will, the life cycle of the funeral director all the way through to retirees. When they were done in June of 2019, they made their recommendations to the board. And their recommendations really weren't specific as to actions to be taken in each area, although work was done and details were worked out in each of them. But their recommendations were to continue the work that they had started, and to do that through a combination of work groups, task forces, and our Bridge Commission to address each of the areas that they focused on. Carving out or working more specifically, or looking at the paraprofessionals more specifically, their recommendation was to create a task force to continue their work. The association board accepted the recommendations, but prior to creating any new work groups or task forces, felt it was important to get additional member input first. As Bill mentioned, the original plan in order to do that was to have conversations with everybody at our regional meetings this past spring. But as we all know, COVID caused us to have to cancel those, and we were able to replace them with these town halls. So what I'd like to do is kind of go into a little bit more detail about the work that paraprofessional work group did to help us have some information and a foundation for the further discussion. So just taking a little bit of maybe a half a step back first, as this task force worked, the way that they arrived at their recommendation, they divided themselves up into mini work groups for each of those areas of focus. And then each work group took a deep dive into each of the focus areas. With regard to the topic of paraprofessionals, that was done through a specific exercise that I want to walk you through now. So what we did was we presented what we called an assumption scenario to that group and had them work on a specific question, answering a specific question as a result of that. So we gave them a hypothetical and we said, assume the state association receives notice from the State Department of Health that due to the extremely low number of licensed funeral directors, they've declared this a public health issue. Further assume that the department's proposing a new license or certification be developed to address the workforce needs due to the lack of number of current licensed funeral directors and their determination that addressing it through newly added or newly licensed funeral directors was not feasible at that point. So the specific question we asked them based on that scenario was, what would the ideal job description and responsibilities be? So as I said, let me walk you through what that work group did. So the first question that they needed to answer, or questions, was really related to the why and the what. Or said another way, why is there a lack of funeral directors and what do we need to account for when creating new positions? And the list of things that they felt they needed to work on or address is listed here. So the goals in any newly created position would be to spark a career interest in funeral service, to create a pool of qualified workers, to protect families by ensuring they're only working with vetted and certified professionals, to counteract the shortage of students in the mortuary science programs, to better serve family needs and respond to funerals being more involved and requiring even more event planning and similar services, to hopefully provide an option for small funeral homes who may not be able to hire another full-time licensed funeral director for it being cost prohibitive for them, to kind of support owners and managers by relieving some of the front and back of the house operations, supplement the availability of funeral service professionals, enhance the role of a licensed funeral director, and address the work-life balance issues of preventing burnout of licensed funeral directors. So that was their very lengthy detailed list of issues that they wanted to try to address through any new positions. So with the why and the what answered, the next question was how. And how can be asked in how are we going to create new positions, or what new positions should we consider? How should we address those needs? And they looked at two positions that you can see listed here: the certified funeral assistant and the certified funeral arranger. These were two positions that they explored. I'd like to point out a very important word to me on this page is explored. I say that because, again, it's very important for you to realize that neither of these two specific positions were recommended to the association board. Again, the recommendation from the task force was to form another task force to continue their work. However, this work group spent a full year, a lot of time, a lot of thought, and a lot of discussion in creating frameworks for both of these positions. So again, I think it's important for you all as our members to see their work. Again, it also gives us a place to begin our conversation once the overview is done. So let me walk you through those two now. With regard to the certified funeral assistant, the intent was really to create a position similar to the paraprofessionals in other fields. You can see here we use the dental field and the legal profession as two examples. There are dental hygienists that assist dentists. There are paralegals that assist lawyers. With regard to the way it would be structured, the framework included that any individual in that position would only be allowed to work under the direct supervision of a licensed funeral director and only be employed by one funeral home at a time. As related to specific duties they could perform, they would be allowed to sign out and transfer the deceased from the place of death and assist the funeral director with preparation, dressing, and casketing. However, they would not be allowed to transport the decedent to the place of final disposition over the concerns you can see listed here. They would not be allowed to direct or supervise services, sign or amend death certificates, embalm, or conduct arrangements. That was something that we'll talk about through that certified arranger position. With regard to education and training requirements for this position, that framework included a training program to be certified, potentially 8 to 12 hours long. At the end of that program, you would have to successfully pass a state recognized exam. Any certification would be issued by the state of New York. And just like funeral directors, they would have to recertify every 2 years. They would have CEs that they would have to attain every biennium. And the group felt it was very important that both OSHA and ethics would be areas to cover for this position. Switching gears slightly to look at the arranger position, similar situation as the assistant in that that individual would only be allowed to work under the direct supervision of a licensed funeral director and employed by one funeral home at a time. In terms of duties they could provide or perform, it would be to make arrangements, collect vital information, coordinate and schedule final disposition, arrange for the care, preparation, and transportation of the decedent, and discuss and sell merchandise and services. However, they would not be allowed to sign contracts, sign or amend death certificates, or embalm. Those functions and responsibilities would rest solely with licensed funeral directors. As it relates to their education and training requirements, again, they would have to go through a pre-certification training program, lengthier in duration. This was proposed at potentially 20 hours, including hands-on arrangements under the direct supervision of a licensed funeral director and an overview of the embalming process, also passing an exam at the end of the program, also certification by the state of New York and recertifying every 2 years. In terms of the number of credits per biennium and topics to be covered, that was still to be determined, although they did feel very strongly that ethics should be a required topic. So that was the framework or the outline of the positions that they had worked on in trying to address that hypothetical question we gave you. I mentioned that they made their recommendations in June of 2019, but right before they were finalizing, or as they were finalizing their recommendation, they asked for some initial member feedback on what they were working on. So what we wound up doing was a member survey in May of 2019, asking some questions about the same areas that they had been working on. So again, just for the sake of giving you some more data points to have in your mind as we have our conversation, I'm going to share some of the questions and answers from that survey with you. So this first slide just shows you the number of people who answered the survey and the breakdown of the positions that they held in their funeral home. With regard to the 239, the way we do our surveys, we give a link to each of our member firms. So we have about 950 firms that are members of the association each year. So this represents about 25% response rate. If you're someone who follows surveys or polling, you will know that they say that in order for a survey or a poll to be statistically valid, you need at least a 22% response rate. So take that for what you will. If you follow that, then at 25, you can say that the results that I'm about to share with you were statistically valid and could be relied upon as a representative sample of our membership. As relates to the questions we asked them if they had experienced a shortage of qualified candidates for qualified funeral directors available for hire. You can see here that about 44% said they had, another 30-ish% said they hadn't, and a quarter of our members just really, it wasn't applicable to them because they just weren't in the market for another funeral director at the time. We asked our members if they were concerned about the future workforce. You can see here that just over 3/4 of our members said they were, another 13% were not, and 10% or so hadn't thought about it or were unsure. You'll see that that's a common theme around that 10 to 11% in the future, in the next slides I'm going to show with you. So we asked them then if they felt we should continue to explore the topic of the license structure in New York State. Just about half said yes. Another 40% said no. And there's that 10.5-ish% that hadn't really given it much thought. We asked then some questions about the two positions I just shared with you. Please understand that at the time we shared the survey or did the survey, we did not share as much detail with them as we did with you just now. We did kind of give them an overview of the position. And based on that overview, asked them if they felt we should continue to explore. You can see here just about 52% said we should continue to explore the funeral assistant position. 37-ish% said no, and there's that 11% that were unsure. Looking at the arranger position, about 35% said we should, another 55 said we shouldn't, and another 10-ish% were unsure. So that was the information that we were able to collect from our survey and information that we shared with the task force prior to their final recommendations coming out to the board. One more slide before I turn it over to discussion, and that's just some information on alcohol in the funeral homes. Please note that we have not had the same level of conversations or due diligence conducted in this topic. No task force or work groups have been formed at this point. This would really be seen as an expansion of food and beverage, and it came up in last year's Governmental Affairs Committee meeting in the context of having a champagne toast in honor of a decedent. The comment was, New York State law now makes it strictly prohibited. It would be nice to be able to have a champagne toast, a Bailey's toast, something along those lines. So that was something was noted, but no further action was taken. However, because these two topics would require a change in law, which is a very detailed process before we go forward with something like that, we wanted to get the members' initial feedback on whether this was something you felt we should continue to explore as well. So with that, that's the information that I wanted to share with you before we open it up for discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm also going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over to everyone who is on the line for your comments and feedback. With regard to offering your comments and feedback, I'm looking, we have a decent number of folks. I think we can still probably manage without too much overlap. So if you have something you want to say, just unmute your microphone. If it starts to be people are talking over one another, another option is to raise your hand or to chat in the chat box. You can type in a comment or a question, and then I will read that to the group. So with that, and again, if you're not speaking, just to avoid background noise, please mute your phones. With that, I will open it up to comments, questions, and feedback. Anyone have any comments about either, whether you feel we should continue to explore these positions, comments, questions?
Mike, I do.
Positions. Don, yes.
Hello, everyone. I've been on numerous of these calls. I just want to give my personal opinion. We're a small family-owned funeral home. The paraprofessional was very helpful during COVID. And I see no reason not to have that in our back pocket if we ever need it again. And in regards to alcohol in a funeral home, previous calls, people have gone off about turning funeral homes into bars, turning funeral homes into party places. We're talking about a simple way of offering services to families to memorialize family members that have passed away. We're not talking about turning your funeral home into a nightclub. And we can say along those lines, I feel so much better. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Questions, comments? What do people feel about what was shared, the two concepts?
Yeah, Mike, this is Ralph Ferrara from Obie Davis. I'm in total agreement with all of it. I think we should move forward on paraprofessionals. It's important. I have not seen people looking for licensed funeral director positions in a very long time. I mean, years ago, we used to get people sending their resumes around and calling, but that's really dried up. So we really could use that. In terms of alcohol, I think moving forward under a professional licensed bartender, beer, wine, and soda, I don't think beer and wine, I don't see as really being a problem. I don't think we should get into the business of mixed drinks, but I think under a limited sense, it seems natural to move forward. So
thank you.
I would be in favor of all those topics.
Thank you.
David Rubin.
Hi, David.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Yeah, I'm definitely think we should keep exploring both issues, especially with help in the funeral home. Very hard to replace funeral directors, let alone even get a resume. And I so often do lectures in some of the mortuary schools, and sometimes there's only 10 kids in the class, and half of them don't pass the test. And then they decide not to even come into the business. And it's just getting, as a manager, getting tougher and tougher to hire people.
And one thing I felt I forgot to mention, obviously, when we planned for the regional meetings to have these discussions, we did not have COVID on the radar. We would have had these conversations in April without really any real life experience on the certified funeral assistant, paraprofessional, deputized agent front. Obviously, there, especially downstate, many of our funeral directors have now firsthand experience with deputized agents. So we've asked folks, because it really has been something that was utilized across the state. If you have some real firsthand experience having used a deputized agent and can share the positives and the negatives, if there were any, with doing that, that'll also help us as we especially look at those paraprofessional positions. So
Yeah.
just forgot to mention that earlier, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, back in March and April, we had deputized some of our help that were receptionists to help us out, and I think without them, we wouldn't have made it through March and April.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, it's Peter.
Yep.
I agree with everything that I've heard so far, especially with the paraprofessionals. As David and my brother said, the pandemic really took us for a loop, and without those volunteers, it really would have impacted us negatively. And what a lot of people are not realizing is that we're just going to hire people off the street and give them a stretcher and a van, and they're going to be going around the hospital to hospital making removals. These people are going to be trained, they're going to be certified, they're going to be hand selected. And the other reason that I really like the paraprofessional concept is that many of our competitors on Long Island are charging $275 to the families if there's a death after 5 p.m. and before 9 a.m. And, you know, they say that it devalues our license. I think that's more of an insulting to a family, charging them what time the person passes away, when we can have a member of our staff trained that's willing to perform that task. And as far as alcohol goes in the funeral home, as long as it's strictly monitored by a bartender and it's limited to beer and wine, I don't see how that hurts us at all. And especially here on Long Island, many of the restaurants, the traditional restaurants, are out of business or closed, or if they're open, they're only at 50% capacity. So there's going to be a greater opportunity for families to spend time together. And if they do that with us, they're going to want to do things that they did on the outside. And I think that helps us as opposed to hurts us.
Thank you. Jeff, I know you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, I get all this and I understand it, but at the same time, I'm a little old fashioned, I guess. And I didn't think I was that old, but I guess I am. As far as the paraprofessionals, I see that, but I also see it being used inappropriately to make sure that licensed funeral directors aren't being hired or even trade. We have trade down here on Long Island and New York City. I know upstate doesn't, but maybe it'd be better to boost trade companies instead of doing this, my personal opinion, but who knows? And as far as food, I've never been in favor of food in the funeral home, and now alcohol. I've had enough interesting funerals in my time to see all the drinking going on in the parking lot and having them come back in, especially during the second visitation group. You know, the 7 o'clockers when they come back from the 4 o'clock feast, coming back into the funeral home. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, could be. As far as the other rumor about charging more for removals after hours, I personally haven't seen that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen that. But those are all my own opinions. I don't understand why we're running catering facilities that supposedly now can't hold any more than 50 inside, because we are inside, just like churches. So yeah, 50 people can come inside for one family, but if you're having 2 families and you've staggered the visiting during the days for a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in mid-afternoon, a couple hours at night, now you got 3 families coming in. You can't fit any more than 50 coming in to accommodate them, unless you're going to accommodate them 1 hour at a time in between. It gets to be, we're not running funeral homes anymore. We're running catering facilities and bars, and guess what? We're also doing funerals on the side, my opinion. But thank you for letting me say it.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just clarify something? Is it 50 people allowed in the building? I thought we were under the assumption of 33% of capacity of our buildings.
The current guidelines are the 33% right now, yes.
Okay, so that would be more than 50 for most of us.
But while you're catering, while you're feeding people in your room, in your catering room?
I'm just talking in general, Jeff, that it's not 50 people, it's 33% of your building.
I understand that also. But I'm talking about once you're actually catering for them, feeding them, and having drinks with them. Then it'd be something else, I think.
So the 33% would apply regardless of the services being provided. So the funeral home would not be, so the restaurants and bars, depending on the areas, are 25 or 50% capacity unless you have the limits. The funeral home would be simply 33% of capacity right now. But again, this is also, you know, something we're talking about. I understand the limitations for COVID make things kind of wonky, for lack of a better word, but this is something we're talking about when we're past COVID. So obviously think about it in terms of you know, it being a permanent change, and if that's, you know, how that might impact it. I don't know if that makes it, Jeff, in your mind, if that makes it better or worse, potentially, you know, in terms of what your concerns are too. So
It makes it just as what I just said. We are running catering facilities and bars and doing funerals on the side.
gotcha. Thank you.
That's what I feel.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike Gordon.
Thanks for doing this, guys. I did sit on the Funeral Service 2020 Task Force, and they were intense meetings. They were productive meetings because obviously things did come out of them. My apprehension was always with the paraprofessional in regards to the arranger process, the arranger category. At first, I was opposed to the removal transport person. But understanding that some funeral homes may not be able to afford a second funeral director to do that as a licensed individual, especially in some of the northern parts of the country, the state. I understand that. I still am apprehensive about the arranger, and that's why I always felt that we needed to do more research on this. I know that funeral homes did benefit from deputizing agents during COVID, and while that may happen again, you know, we've got the experience of how that works. My biggest concern about the paraprofessional position is this, and I look at it this way. We're talking, it was mentioned before that there are students or there's down enrollment in mortuary schools. We're looking at, in my opinion, we're looking to ice the cake before it's even made. When you bake a cake, you start with the first layer of that cake. We need to, and this was brought up by the task force, we need to look at the high school students. We need to look at what's going on in the high schools. The residency program needs to be explored. We need to start from the ground up, going from the middle to look at to look at certified arrangers and certified removers is kind of going it at the middle. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't look at from both angles, but I do really strongly feel, and I felt this when I was on the committee, that we have to look at the ground up, because if you try to go from the top down, it's going to hurt all aspects. The other avenue that we have to look at too is how this will affect licensed funeral directors. We might see, and I mentioned this during the committee, we might see funeral homes, if these two, if the certified arranger and certified removal specialist do come into play, we could see funeral homes that they a group of funeral homes, say they have 2 or 3 firms, they could do away with licensed staff and certify a remover and an arranger, cut down on their payroll costs, cut down on their overhead, lay off funeral directors, and staff certified individuals to do the work of licensed funeral directors. So while this may not affect our license directly, it will start affecting licensed funeral directors out in the field where there may be layoffs. That might be good, but I think it might in the long run be bad, because that's the last thing that we want to do is jeopardize our profession by taking on non-licensed individuals or certified individuals to help our day in and day out business.
Thank you. We did have a question in the chat room. I thought the paraprofessional legislation was removal only. So at this point, there really wasn't a recommendation on either position going forward. It was really, here's the 2 positions that we looked at to try to address that hypothetical. The task force recommendation was continue the work we had to see if either of these or something different might be a solution to that question. So it's still wide open in terms of what potentially could come out of any further discussions. Obviously, it would have to be something that the membership supports, which is why we're starting to have these conversations. But there's no answer to that question yet. It might be some third position that hasn't even been thought of yet.
So, Mike, I'm just going to share some information, maybe spark some additional dialogue. So with regards to the concept of alcohol in the funeral home, some people have talked about it as food and beverage 2.0. would give us the opportunity to work with licensed bartenders, just like funeral homes that support and use licensed caterers. For a family that may want to have a glass of wine or a champagne toast or a bottle of beer when they're there, that's what that represents. And what we know is that 49 of the 50 states allow for food and light beverage in the funeral home. 46 out of the 50 states allow for alcohol in the funeral home to be consumed by families. And that happens two different ways. The first is through specific legislation for the funeral homes. And the second is if there's no specific legislation, the funeral homes will have the ability to make application and get licensed through their local governance, whether that be on the county or the state level. With regards and what we've identified as well, and just so I want people to know, these conversations and this information is not being done in a vacuum. This is information that has been brought to us time and time again. And what we do know, and this started to come out early on in our regional meetings last week, was that we know that matriculation for the mortuary science program in Hudson Valley is down. We know that the one gentleman that brought this real-time information to us, who just graduated, had 44 people were in the class and they only graduated 6. So we do see that there is a concern in the future with the amount of qualified people that are going in, graduating, and even less people are going into the profession. So that's part of the discussion as well. And with regards to the paraprofessional, I guess I'll just try to get it all out right now. When we think of other professions, right? When we think of the legal profession, there are paraprofessionals that support attorneys. It doesn't devalue the attorney. There are paramedics that support the medical profession. It does not devalue the doctor. So what I want us to do as well is to keep an open mind, and let's not think about devaluing, but think about enhancing our profession and where we could be. And that's the overall focus that many of us have, that this is something that would be good for our profession and not a detriment.
Thanks,
And
Bill.
I'm sorry, one last thing, Mike,
Yep.
about, I promise I'll try to stay quiet, is that I also want people to keep an open mind, right? So where we are, our discussion now is Long Island, but we have to think about Chautauqua County, Oswego, the Finger Lakes, areas throughout our state, colleagues that we know, some we don't, that would benefit from things like this, like a paraprofessional that can help with a transfer. And what I don't want to do is to make a decision based on one demographic that may actually hurt or hinder a colleague, somewhere, 4 hours or 5 hours away from where we are now. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I have Paul Rudolph had his hand up. So Paul, if you'd like to speak, and then I'll go to Jeff again. Paul, I don't know if your phone is on mute right now, so I don't know if you're trying to comment. All right, Jeff, I don't know if you want to go, and we'll see if Paul if he's still
All right.
there.
Thank you very much, Bill, for those comments. Since you brought them up, we're talking about paraprofessionals and other professions, considered professions, which would be the legal things and courts and things like that, paraprofessionals. To date, I'm not aware of it, but I'm willing to have an open mind. So open my mind to this. How many times do we have food and drink in a courtroom, or invited to have food and drink in a courtroom, even to perhaps toast a victory in a courtroom? Food and drink in a doctor's office, also professionals. When do we toast our new dentures when we're having that done, or a doctor's visit when we get good news, or we have food or a buffet? In our other professional settings, some people don't even consider us professionals because we don't all have 4-year degrees or more. We try to consider ourselves professionals, and providing people, our communities, with professional atmosphere to conduct themselves with is important, I think. But then again, keep opening up my mind and verifying that those other places have nothing to do with us. Those other professional places where they show dignity and respect to one another in those areas. Thank you.
John, I know you have your hand up. Paul put his hand up again, so I'm just going to try one more time. Paul, if you're unmuted, then go for it.
Sure, Mike. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was on the phone there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was on both these topics, we're not really going into it blind at all. Number one, during COVID here, we've seen the definite need for paraprofessionals / deputized agents. It was invaluable while they were here that we'd be able to do that. I don't think we could have done it without it. Number two, as far as alcohol in the funeral homes, number one, we've seen it requested by families and we see the need for it. And number two, we can witness what's happened in other states. They really haven't had a problem with it. And also, as was just mentioned, as far as paraprofessionals in the medical field, the legal field, it assists them, and I don't think some doctors could have handled it now. Paraprofessionals are on a greater basis now assigning death certificates, and it's certainly helping the doctors.
Thank you. John DiAngelo, I know you had your hand raised. So.
Yes, in regards to the alcohol in funeral homes again, we have to get away from the party atmosphere and think about the service atmosphere. I'm doing 3 or 4 memorial services a month on Saturdays now. I live in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, which is probably one of the hippest communities on the East Coast of the United States. More hotels have popped up in this area. If the hotels start saying to the families, you're coming into Greenpoint, Williamsburg for a memorial service, why not stay in the hotel? And I lose those funds for the memorial service. If I'm able to offer a champagne toast or cocktail services in a limited fashion and keep people in the building, that's the whole purpose we're in business, to keep using our buildings. It's just another tool that allows us to sell funeral homes to people. Can't have outsiders controlling our destiny.
Sounds like Darian.
It is. It's John.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? John Rufaro.
Okay, yes, a lot of good information, and certainly I think we can all agree the shortage of funeral directors and the fact that as we look at the schools and what's happening, that shortage is going to continue to grow and become more and more of a challenge. And in addition to increasing our people power at this point to help enhance our services in these various functions, I also look at it as a way to attract people to funeral service, to our profession that might not otherwise be attracted. And that could be a huge help going forward to get more and more people interested in funeral service. Now the investment of time and expense to become a funeral director is quite considerable. And because of that, there may be people interested, but are not going to consider it due to that barrier. So I think this is a great way to approach it and a great way to get going. As far as when we had the food and beverage and we went through all of that, my thinking at that time was, if we have the ability to provide a product that our client families want, and we knew they wanted it from services, and it is optional for us to provide it if we had concerns about not wanting it in our personal funeral homes. We have that option, and I think the alcoholic beverages is an opportunity to provide families another service. We know it's something they want, and we know it can be controlled based on our ability and the way we've been able to control food in the past. What we perceived as perhaps a party atmosphere with the food didn't happen. People respected the place that they were at, the event, and so forth. And I believe we'll have the same kind of respect with the alcoholic beverage if we can bring that into our service as well. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
One more thing about the licenses and people going to school. Have we asked the question why people aren't going into funeral service anymore? Since everybody wants to trend us down into.
Yeah, I mean, we started the association, as I mentioned, that the task force had looked at the pre-students. Leading into that, we had looked at it from the outreach and engagement area of the association. We had started a campaign called Career in Funeral Service, We had funeral directors who graciously agreed to be part of a video, created some materials. We connected with the School Counselors Association and gave them that information. So we have begun those efforts to try to give the tools to the guidance counselors and to just put it out and that someone who might have an interest can find information out about the funeral service industry and being a funeral director. Our Bridge Commission is regularly in front of the mortuary science students, going and visiting the schools, trying to connect that way. They've even gone to some of the high school career fairs, some of our funeral directors, to try to help folks. So it's I think along the lines of what Mike Gordon was saying earlier. If you go back to that circle graph, from the association standpoint, we are trying to tackle this from every angle. Whether or not this is, part of the tackling it is part of that's the conversation. Should this be another tool in the toolbox? Should it be something that we should be exploring? But doing something along in this line would not stop us from the other work that we're doing. As a matter of fact, the Tribute Foundation is also looking at ways to try to help reach out to high schoolers, just in general on death education and grieving. This could be another area that they are looking at possibly going into to put some resources behind. So we're trying. It's just, like a lot of things, it's a slow turn before you start seeing some progress, hopefully anyway.
But we haven't gotten any answers why someone doesn't want to be going to funeral service because they want to do something else, right?
The only thing that I heard was, and this was at one of the local association leadership conferences, we were talking about this, right? This was a joint effort with the local association to help fund it, the career and funeral service campaign. We actually had somebody who had said that their guidance counselor had told them not to do that because it's only a family business, so you couldn't get into it. And then we had somebody else who was in our meeting who later went to a doctor after surgery. They were doing a follow-up and mentioned to the doctor they were a funeral director. And they said, he said, "Oh, I always wanted to do that." And they said, "Well, why didn't you?" He's like, "Oh, my guidance counselor told me it wasn't an option for me." So now, granted, that might've been a long time ago, but that's one of the reasons why we were trying to get to the guidance counselors. They're not offering that. They're going and telling people to be nurses and other areas of healthcare, not really thinking about this when it potentially could be a great fit for a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't know about it. So but that's just the two anecdotal, stories I heard. Beyond that, we really don't have a lot of data as to why people are choosing other professions.
And why would someone prefer to be a paraprofessional as a removing person or as a arranging person other than being a licensed funeral director? Would there be incentive to do that first, you think, and then becoming a licensed funeral director? For what reason would that be?
Yeah, that was discussed. Possibly someone who's not sure if they want the 2-year commitment and the cost of tuition, and if they can do something like this and be involved in some way. And hopefully it's a stepping stone to taking the next step. I mean, I know as an attorney, I know there are some paralegals I know who, while they're working in the law firm, are studying in law school to become an attorney because they found that they wanted to take the next step. A lot who just decide that they're going to stay paralegals, but that's the hope anyways. And as you saw from the rationales, that you would spark a career interest by offering this entree into the field without maybe the financial commitment and time commitment. But the goal would be get a taste, but you really want to do more. You want to be able to work with families directly. You want to be able to do everything a licensed funeral director can do. So you'd have to commit to that and take that next step. Again, that was the concept discussed.
Excellent. Okay.
Andy, I see your hands raised. Sorry about that. You're on mute, Andy. Andy, you're still on mute.
I didn't know which button to hit. I only hit the one button. But as you know, I'm sitting here listening to the comments, and all of it's very appreciated, much of it well thought out, I think. But Mike, as you know, originally I was involved with the task force on funeral education, which we morphed into a couple of different things. But we based the paraprofessional certification on a program that's already in place in Vermont, which requires a certain amount of education and certification to become a removal specialist. That's the program in Vermont. One of the things we talked about that with the decline in help throughout the state, many of the rural areas may in fact be in favor of this type of program with the proper certification and education, with the hopes that maybe that would then spark some interest in pursuing a funeral director's license. So we felt strongly on that program and chose to pursue it as you've laid out. The other question I have, we keep hearing a number of things. When we originally had the legislation for food and beverage in a funeral home, there was a certain organization that pushed for alcohol in a funeral home at that time and then agreed to support the legislation for food and beverage with the removal of the alcohol provision. And we also heard about the benefits of food in the funeral home. Well, the legislation was passed. Do we have any statewide statistics on how funeral homes, or if in fact they have benefited by offering food in a funeral home? I was against food in the funeral home. I'm against alcohol in a funeral home. I voted against food in a funeral home. But I think we've had the program in place now for a number of, or a certain amount of time in order to give us some sort of statistics. Has in fact it benefited funeral service throughout the state?
Yeah, so we don't know the answer to if it's benefited or not. The only question we've been asking in our annual member surveys each year is, are you currently offering it? And I think the last survey that we did earlier this year, there was about 40, I want to say 48, 49% or so. So kind of a 50-50 split of those who responded, who said that they were offering it. So from that, you can, I don't, that's
You can offer it, but there's a couple of ways you're offering it. You're offering it for a benefit, or you're offering it because you're forced into offering it and become a competitive nature.
Right. We didn't ask that question. We didn't
I
dig
think
into
it's
anything more.
wonderful.
You froze there.
You can offer a loss leader doesn't mean you.
Hey,
said
Andy,
you can offer it as a loss leader, but that doesn't mean you're gaining any benefit out of it.
I understand. Gotcha. That went through that time. Thank you. Peter D'Arienzo, I see your hands up.
Yes, Mike, two quick points. One about paralegal in regards to the question of why no one's coming into the business. In my opinion, the obvious answer is pay and the hours. Nobody wants to work weekends. We can't get people to work night shifts. So I think we have a huge problem in filling in both the pay scale. If you're a college graduate, you're going to come into our business, you're going to work nights, you're going to work weekends. That's a major concern. A lot of these paraprofessionals that I'm looking at would be people who are coming in strictly for a second career or to supplement their income. So I think that's one of the reasons we need to consider paralegals. And in regards to the alcohol, we give all of our families a survey. This is not just a revenue driver. There's not that much money in these catering issues, but the highest score you can get on a survey is 1,000. Our families score us anywhere from 15 to 20 points higher when we provide a catered event. It's a service driver, and the service driver is going to lead to additional business. That's the way that I see it.
Thank you.
That's the cell I gave you.
I don't see anything else in the chat box. No hands are raised. Anybody else have any additional comments, questions they'd like to share with the group? Yes, James.
Hi, good afternoon. I just, that to talk about everything that's already been spoken about. I just figured I would voice my opinion and say I'm in full support of all the issues with the paraprofessionals and the alcohol. I think it's just another way to provide those services to the families so that they can grieve properly without any further worry.
Thank you. Yes, Lindsay.
Yeah, I wanted quickly just the same thing. We saw how vital the extra help was during COVID, and we truly could not have done it with the help we've received. So I am fully in support of paraprofessionals for what we're all talking about, and the same with alcohol. I mean, you're going to have problems with any service you provide, but I think it's a service that's necessary and people want it, and I'm definitely in favor for both.
Thank you. Else, I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping track of everything I see on my screen. Well, if anybody's thinking about that for a minute, I will also offer up that if anybody has any questions, comments, anything about COVID related issues, I know that things are changing as we head into the fall. Cases are going up. Some of the microcluster strategies, some of the other things. I mentioned that we will be having our call next week, but if in the meantime, there's anything right now that anybody has a question about, since we have a group together, feel free to ask about that as well. I'll just give another minute or so for anyone to ask another question on anything. Yep, Mike Gordon.
A while back, there was mention about that funeral directors were going to be responsible for doing COVID and influenza tests. Whatever became of that?
So that's still pending in the pending file. So when that emergency regulation came out, we, along with the folks from the Bureau, Department of Health, and the Wadsworth Lab folks got on a call. We wanted to talk to them in the late part of the summer to make sure that if there were protocols, procedures, we had tons of questions from people, that we had our own questions. We needed guidance. They said they would get back to us. As of today, we haven't heard back. I checked with the Bureau, they haven't heard back. So in the meantime, we wanted to make sure that there was at least some direction and guidance we could give to you guys. So we worked with the Bureau, and while it's not officially out there, this is the official guidance that we're giving and our recommendation, as well as what I'm told that the Bureau is saying if someone calls. So let me go back to the circumstances that might create the situation where you'll be required to test. So under the emergency regulation, the only time a funeral director is going to be required to potentially give this test if you are contacted by or advised by this physician, the attending or primary physician, within the first 48 hours after death, that they suspect it could be COVID or the flu, but no test was conducted, they could ask you to do that test. It's further limited by the fact that it'd have to be an unattended home death before it was even a test that you would be asked to conduct. If someone dies in a hospital, for nursing home, long-term care facility, those facilities are required to test. If they cannot test, they have to go to the state of New York and ask the Department of Health for help. So that's the limited scope where it could come up. We have no evidence and nothing has been shown that the doctors even know they're supposed to ask you guys to test in a situation like that. So go back to the beginning. If they don't ask you, you don't have to do anything. So we don't anticipate you'll be asked in the meantime. However, if you have a situation where someone does know they're supposed to ask you and they do ask you, here's what we're saying to do. There is no guidance as of right now. Go to either or both your local health department and the coroner or medical examiner and say you've been asked to test. And what are you supposed to do? Do you have ask them if they have a test kit. Ask them how the process is going to be, because unless they can give you that, you've then extended all your reasonable responsibility or due diligence to try to do it, and just stop. You don't have to do any more. Just note it down somewhere so that you're protecting yourselves as best you can. So we don't anticipate it coming up in a practical sense because we don't think anybody knows to come to you. We advised Wadsworth Lab of the coroners and medical examiners who are part of that emergency regulation, who are going to be involved in an unattended home death, so that that's the group they can go to first. There's a much smaller universe of them than there are funeral directors to try to work with. The lab, they were much more inclined and they wanted to reach out to the the coroners and medical examiners. We gave them the contact information for their association. They were going to go back to them to get them online so that they would be the place they would go first instead of you guys, even in that unattended home death situation. So that's why we're saying go back to them as well, because they should have been contacted by right now. We still want guidance, but at this point it's let sleeping dogs lie, because we are concerned that if they say you have to have test kits and go get test kits and pay for test kits, this was a classic ready, fire, aim approach by the state trying to be preventative, but they didn't think everything through. So we know we have the Bureau on our side as well. We have the Wadsworth Lab folks on our side. So for now, hopefully you won't be asked to do it. If you are, turn to your local health department, coroner or medical examiner and tell them you've been asked and say, I need advice. What am I supposed to do?
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right. So I want to thank everybody for being with us this afternoon. Really appreciate the dialogue and the feedback. Before I conclude and we depart, I would like to just turn it back over to our president, Bill Villanova, for some closing remarks.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. And once again, thank you to everybody for participating with us today. We truly appreciate it. We love hearing from all of our colleagues. And believe it or not, I believe, and I think Andy would probably agree that through these virtual town halls, this was the most that we've seen from Region 1 all the way down to Region 9. It was a great turnout. You don't always have the ability to bring so many people together because of travel, but I want to thank everybody for that. Please always keep in mind and consider the State Association as a trusted resource for anything that you need. If there's concerns that you have, reach out to Mike. Mike and his team are incredibly responsive and incredibly helpful to our profession. I wish everybody the very best, and I want you all to stay healthy, stay safe, and have a great day. And I thank you as well. Have a great day.
Peter, I see your hands up if you wanted to.
Yeah, one last question. First of all, thank Mr. Villanova and you, Mike, for putting this together on behalf of all of us. It was a very, very good discussion. What are the next steps? What's the timeline from here? How does this play out moving forward?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning of it, what we're going to do next is we're going to consolidate all this information, all the feedback we received, and we're going to present it to the association board at the December board meeting. The next step from that would most likely be that there would be work groups and task force created to further explore the topic and work into some of the questions and concerns that were raised, some of the information that was brought up, kind of work through the details of what that might look like, whether it's paraprofessional, alcohol in the funeral home. And then my assumption would be that we would have a second round of conversations with our members to once we have more flesh on the bone, so to speak, or meat on the bone, I'm sorry, so to speak. And then the timeline itself for when we would be potentially ready to go forward if we decide to hasn't really been discussed at this point. So I don't have an answer for you on how quickly or slowly that something like that might take. And this, before everybody heads out, just one more thing that Bill reminded me of when he said to reach back out. If any of you, after we're done, think of something else that you'd like to share, a question you'd like to ask, please email that to me so that I can be sure to either answer your question or include it in the information we provide to the board. So you can just email me at mike@nysfda.org. Also let your colleagues know who weren't able to join us that this will be available so they can view this and the other town halls, and also encourage them to provide any feedback that they have to us. We want as much member input as we can to make the best decisions we can for our membership going forward. So with that, I want to thank everybody again for being part of this. Have a great rest of your day, and hope we can all see each other soon. Hopefully someday sooner in person again instead of on Zoom. So take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you all.